If you are visiting with us, I hope you won't be too alarmed that the good people of Independent Presbyterian Church are hearing a story from the Apocalypse of John to start our new year. It's been such an upside-down year, though, that it seemed fitting to begin where the story ends. The book we read, the words we just read from Revelation come near the very end of the Bible, written by John of Patmos, who is probably not the same John as the disciple John or the writer of the Gospel according to John. He's in exile, and a dangerous sea separates him from the people he loves, a group of people who are trying to make their way as followers of Jesus under the persecution of a brutal regime. Both John and the 7 churches in Asia Minor to whom he writes live in fear for their lives. And I suspect that something I know to be true for most preachers is also true for John. He's preaching on 2 fronts. He's bearing the message that he knows his people need to hear, but he needs to hear it himself too. These early Christians and John himself need to be reminded that while their earthly future appears threatened, God's future is not in doubt. Or put differently, the story ends the same way it began, with God, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. For now, as we take our first tentative steps into 2017, I invite you to set aside whatever baggage you've brought with you to the book of Revelation, its apocalyptic imagery, its coded and confusing language, and please don't waste any of your energy on making checklists of signs of the end times. Only God knows those details of where and when and how. Today, I invite you to just go with what Revelation promises: the unflinching hope that the Christian story has an end, and it is a good one. Even if we can't perceive it now, our God is bringing heaven to earth, and he will make an end of everything that causes pain and suffering, and God will live in our midst in a renewed creation. And that is good news. That is good news to a world made weary by terrorism and violence and a polarizing and divisive political climate, untimely celebrity deaths, and untold amounts of personal suffering and tragedy. I've seen some social media posts that have declared 2016 the worst year ever. I don't know about that. Probably, if we take the long view of history, that's a bit of an arrogant claim on the part of Americans who are comfortable enough to have smartphones and Twitter accounts. But still, there's no denying that this has been a hard season for many people. I'm not blaming 2016 specifically, but like many of you, I have felt concerned for the state of our world and for the most vulnerable members of our communities, and sad for friends who are suffering. That's nothing new, really, but it's felt more acute lately. So I'm ready to say a benediction over 2016, and I bet some of you are as well. Now, of course, we do this every year at the start of a new year. It seems there is something in our hard wiring that causes us to long for the chance to begin again. The new year offers as good an opportunity as any to reboot our lives. And so we make resolutions or we set intentions. We tell ourselves that in this new year, we will exercise more, or pay off our credit card bills, or learn to be better managers of our time. All kinds of things that we know we should do. But year after year, we discover that our resolutions fall short. We don't have the will or the interest to do what we set out to do. And another year passes, and lo and behold, we're still carrying the weight or the debt or the hurt, whatever it is. I don't say this to discourage you. If there's something you need to change about your life to pursue health and wholeness, by all means, do it. Take care of yourself. Come and tell me about it, and I'll encourage you, and I'll pray for you while you try. I'd be willing to bet there are a lot of other people here who'd be willing to do the same. But I mention all this to point to the great gap between what we hope for and what we can actually bring about. This is true on a personal level, it's true on a cosmic scale, and everywhere in between. There is simply a vast distance between what is and what should be. Fortunately for us, our faith makes some very bold and specific claims about this. In fact, I believe there is something sacred in our desire to start fresh. I think that this longing to mend what is broken in our lives and in the world is, in fact, a holy longing. Remember, we do this every week. We just did it when we confessed and we received forgiveness. So I don't want to dismiss this urge. In fact, I want us to leverage it. The best thing I read on this topic was a piece by Donald Miller. You may know him from his book Blue Like Jazz or some of his other writings. Miller suggests that instead of making a resolution, we craft a story. He is a writer, after all. Miller likes goals, he says, and he sets them for himself. But he says he's found it more useful to place these goals within the context of an overarching plot. Miller says that stories begin with someone who wants something. That's the engine. So he suggests naming what it is you really want, and then imagining the end of the story. After you've got that vision of the end, fill in the rest of the plot from there. The example he uses is his own plan to climb a mountain several months from now with friends. He'll have to take steps to do that. He'll have to eat well, and he'll have to exercise if he's going to make it up that mountain. You see, making a story makes a more compelling narrative and gives us something to hold on to when we aren't particularly motivated to do the actual work that needs to be done to get us to what we want. The movement of the story can become the movement of our lives. I think we even can push this idea a little farther than Miller does, though. I want to encourage each one of us, as we think about our own lives and resolutions, to place them within the larger context of God's story. A story where the ending has already been imagined, has already been written. Because here is the thing. The gospel tells a much better story than the world does. And I suspect a lot of our resolutions are rooted in what the world tells us rather than in what the gospel promises us. One of the stories that the world tells us is that we aren't attractive enough, or organized enough, or achieving enough. But the gospel tells us that we are beloved children of God, and that God's desire is to live among us, that we belong to God. Isn't that a much better story? Another story the world tells us is that our lives don't matter much. That, like Shakespeare says in Macbeth, life's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. But the gospel says that heaven is drawing near and that the world's pains matter to God, and that God will make an end to death and to tears. Again, that's a much better story. And as Flannery O'Connor explains in Wise Blood, the world tells us the blind don't see, the lame don't walk, and what's dead stays that way. But the gospel tells us that even now, God is making all things new. So here's a thought. Write your story, and when you do, write it big. Infuse it with some of God's imagination. Don't write your story according to what the world tells you you ought to be or you should do. Write it against the backdrop of the most beautiful story of God's love affair with the world. Take better care of yourself and the people you love and the world around you, because you are called to work alongside a God who desires the healing of the whole creation. We've been invited into this amazing, sacred story. Won't you join in this holy movement? Friends, no bad habit, bad decision, or character flaw in us is beyond the reach and redemption of our loving and powerful God. That is a much better story, and it has the added benefit of being the absolute gospel truth. All glory be to our God, who is even now making all things new. Amen.